EgyptAir Flight 648 was a regularly scheduled international flight between Athens Ellinikon International Airport, Greece, and Cairo International Airport, Egypt. On November 23, 1985, a Boeing 737-200 airliner, registered Suez, servicing the flight, was hijacked by the terrorist organization Abu Nidal. The subsequent raid on the aircraft by Egyptian troops killed 56 of the 86 passengers, 2 of the 3 hijackers, and 2 of the 6 crew, making the hijacking of Flight 648 one of the deadliest such incidents in history. Hijacking. On November 23, 1985, Flight 648 took off at p.m. on its Athens to Cairo route. 10 minutes after takeoff, 3 Palestinian members of the Abu Nidal gang hijacked the aircraft. The same group also responsible for the hijacking of Pan Am Flight 73 a year later. The terrorists, declaring themselves to be Egyptian revolutionaries by the intercom, were well armed with guns and grenades. The terrorists' commander, Salem Shakur, proceeded to check all passports, while Omar Rezik went to the cockpit to change the aircraft's course. At the same time, Shakur had the European, Australian, Israeli, and American passengers sit in the front of the aircraft, while the rest, including the Greeks and Egyptians, were sent to the back. Shakur saw an Australian passenger, Tony Lyons, aged 36, holding a camera. Believing Lyons had taken a picture of him, Shakur took the camera and ripped the film out before slamming the camera into the wall. Shakur came to an Egyptian security service agent, Method Mustafa Kamal, aged 26, who reached into his coat as if to pull out his passport. Instead, he withdrew a handgun and began shooting, killing Shakur. He subsequently engaged in a shootout with the other hijacker, Bou said. Nar al-Din Mohammed Nar al-Din Bou said. 19 shots were fired until Kamal and 2 flight attendants were wounded by Rezik. In the exchange of fire, the fuselage was punctured, causing a rapid depressurization. The aircraft was forced to descend to 14,000 feet 4300 m to allow the crew and passengers to breathe, with the oxygen masks deploying. Libya was the original destination of the hijackers, but due to a lack of fuel, damage from the shootout, and negative publicity, Malta was chosen. While approaching Malta, the aircraft was running dangerously low on fuel, experiencing serious pressurization problems and carrying wounded passengers. However, Maltese authorities did not give permission for the aircraft to land. The Maltese government had previously refused permission to other hijacked aircraft, including on September 23, 1982, when an Alitalia aircraft was hijacked on its way to Italy. The EgyptAir 648 hijackers insisted and forced the pilots Hani Galil and Imad Munib, both aged 39, to land at Lucca Airport. As a last attempt to stop the landing, the runway lights were switched off, but the pilot managed to land the damaged aircraft safely. There are total 92 passenger and 6 crew members. A notable passenger was actress Lupita Pauls, with her daughter Layla. Standoff. At first, Maltese authorities were optimistic they could solve the crisis. Malta had good relations with the Arab world, and 12 years earlier had successfully resolved a potentially more serious situation, when a KLM Boeing 747 landed there under similar circumstances. KLM Flight 861. The Maltese premier, Karmenu Mifsud Bonici, rushed to the airport's control tower and assumed responsibility for the negotiations. The remaining 2 hijackers allowed medics and engineers to examine the injured and the damage to the airplane, respectively. The medics confirmed that the commanding hijacker, Salem Shakur, was dead, while the sky marshal that killed him, Kamal, was still alive. In a rage, Omar Rezik, who assumed command of the hijacking, shot Kamal again as he was led off the plane. Somehow, Kamal survived. The doctor told Rezik the sky marshal was dead and was able to get him off the airplane. Aided by an interpreter, Bonici refused to refuel the aircraft, or to withdraw Maltese armed forces which had surrounded the plane, until all passengers were released. 16 Filipino and 16 Egyptian passengers and 2 injured flight attendants were allowed off the plane. The hijackers then started shooting hostages, starting with Tamar Artzi, aged 24, an Israeli woman, whom they shot in the head and back. Artzi survived her wounds. Assuming command of the hijacking, Rezik threatened to kill a passenger every 15 minutes until his demands were met. His next victim was Nitzan Mendelsohn, aged 23, another Israeli woman, who died a week later after being declared brain dead. Mendelsohn realized what was to happen, so she resisted. Rezik grabbed her by the hair and led her out onto the staircase before shooting her. While tossing Mendelsohn's body down the stairs, he noticed Artsy move. He shot her through the back from the top of the stairs. Again, Artsy survived her wounds. He then targeted 3 Americans, having their hands tied behind them. After the shooting of Mendelsohn, Maltese soldiers surrounded the airplane. Spotting them from the cockpit window, Rezik demanded that the soldiers be withdrawn. Negotiators told him he had no choice but to surrender. Rezik was informed that if the plane left Malta, American jets based in Italy would intercept and shoot down the plane. This enraged Rezik. By intercom, Rezik had a flight attendant call forward Patrick Scott Baker, aged 28, an American fisherman biologist on vacation. Rezik stepped back when Baker locked eyes with him as he came forward. Tony Lyons, an Australian passenger who could see the stairs platform from his window seat, later stated that he saw that Rezik had to raise his gun in order to shoot Baker, who was about 6'5" tall. The bullet grazed Baker's skull after he moved it at the last second but played dead. Rezik pushed his body down the steps. Baker waited a few minutes before making a run for it, hands still tied behind his back. 15 minutes later, Rezik called for Scarlett Marie Rogenkamp, aged 38, a U.S. Air Force civilian employee. Making her kneel on the staircase, Rezik shot her in the back of the head, killing her instantly. Her body was later taken to a hospital, where she was identified by Baker. Jackie Nink Flug, aged 30, wasn't shot until the next morning. Of the 5 passengers shot, Artsy, Baker, and Flug survived. Mendelsohn died in a Maltese hospital a week after the hijacking after being declared brain dead. For 5 hours, Flug drifted in and out of consciousness until an airport grounds crew retrieved her body on its way to the morgue. They discovered she was still alive and rushed her to the nearby hospital. France, the UK, and the United States all offered to send anti-hijack forces. Bonici was pressured by both the hijackers and the United States and Egypt ambassadors, who were at the airport. The non-aligned Maltese government feared that the Americans or the Israelis would arrive and take control of the area, as the U.S. Naval Air Station Sigonella was only 20 minutes away. A U.S. Air Force C-130 Hercules with an aeromedical evacuation team from Rhine-Main Air Base 2 and Aeromedical Evacuation Squadron near Frankfurt, Germany, and rapid deploying surgical teams from Wiesbaden Air Force Medical Center were on standby at the U.S. Navy Hospital at Naples. When the U.S. told Maltese authorities that Egypt had a Special Forces counterterrorism team trained by the U.S. Delta Force ready to move in, they were granted permission to come. The Egyptian Unit 777, commanded by Major General Kamal Ashia, was flown in with 4 American officers. Negotiations were prolonged as much as possible, and it was agreed that the airplane should be attacked on the morning of 25 November when food was to be taken into the aircraft. Soldiers dressed as caterers would jam the door open and attack. Raid. Without warning, Egyptian commandos began the raid about an hour and a half before it had been planned originally. They blasted open the passenger doors and luggage compartment doors with explosives. 52 passengers, including pregnant women and children, suffocated from the fumes that enveloped the aircraft when the soldiers placed a bomb underneath the fuselage to break into the hold. Another 5 were shot by them. According to Dr. Abella Medici, 2 kilos of highly explosive Semtex were used, which provided more power than was necessary to allow the commandos safe entry into the airplane. Mifsud Bonici stated that these explosions caused the internal plastic of the airplane to catch fire, causing widespread suffocation. However, the Times of Malta, quoting sources at the airport, reported that when the hijackers realized they were being attacked, they lobbed hand grenades into the passenger area, killing people and igniting the fire aboard. The storming of the aircraft killed 54 of the remaining 87 passengers, as well as 2 crew members and 1 hijacker. Only 1 hijacker, Omar Rezik, who had survived, remained undetected by the Maltese government. Rezik came out of the cockpit only to be shot in the chest by a commando throwing a grenade as he went down. Captain Galil subsequently tried to attack Rezek with the cockpit axe, but Rezek managed to escape from the aircraft. The New York Times reported at one point, however, that the hijacker's commander shot Captain Galil, grazing his forehead. And Captain Galil hit the hijacker with an axe, then Egyptian soldiers shot the hijacker. None of the Egyptian commandos were killed, but one had a leg blown off. Rezek removed his hood and ammunition and pretended to be an injured passenger. Egyptian commandos tracked Rezek to St. Luke's General Hospital and, holding the doctors and medical staff at gunpoint, entered the casualty ward looking for him. He was arrested when some of the passengers in the hospital recognized him. Rezek was tried in Malta, but with no anti-terrorism legislation. He was tried on other charges. There was widespread fear that terrorists would hijack a Maltese airplane or perform a terrorist attack in Malta as an act of retribution. Rezek received a 25-year sentence. For reasons unclear, Maltese authorities released him some 7 years later, in February 1993, and allowed him to board an airplane to Ghana. His release caused a diplomatic incident between Malta and the U.S., because Maltese law strictly prohibits trying a person twice in any jurisdiction, on charges related to the same series of events similar to but having wider limitations compared to classic double jeopardy. Rezek's itinerary was to take him from there to Nigeria, and then to Ethiopia, and finally to Sudan. Ghanaian officials detained Rezek for several months, but eventually allowed him to proceed to Nigeria. When Rezek's airplane landed in Nigeria, Nigerian authorities denied him entry into the country and handed him to FBI agents departing for the United States. He was brought before a U.S. court and on October 8, 1996, sentenced to life imprisonment with a no parole recommendation. Aftermath and criticism. In his 1989 book Massacre in Malta, John A. Mizza wrote, Malta was faced with a problem it was ill-equipped to meet. The authorities took a firm stand in denying fuel to the hijackers but made no sensible provisions, through political bias and lack of experience, to meet the circumstances that arose from this decision. No proper team was set up at the outset to evaluate or deal progressively with the crisis. Although only a few days previously an incident management course had been organized by a team of U.S. experts in Malta at the request of the government. Mitzi added, the Egyptian commandos were given to free a hand, and they acted out of their mission with little regard for the safety of the passengers. They were determined to get the hijackers at all costs, and the Maltese government's initial refusal for U.S. anti-terrorist resources, a team led by a major general with listening devices and other equipment offered by the State Department through the U.S. Embassy in Malta, a decision reversed too late, contributed in no small measure to the mismanagement of the entire operation. Mizzi also mentioned how Maltese soldiers positioned in the vicinity of the aircraft were equipped with rifles but were not issued ammunition. An Italian Secret Service report on the incident showed how the fire inside the aircraft was caused by the Egyptian commandos who placed explosives in the aircraft cargo hold, the most vulnerable part of the aircraft, as it held the oxygen tanks, which blew up. During the hijacking, only the Socialist Party media and state-controlled television were given information on the incident. Such was the censorship of the media that the Maltese people first heard of the disaster through radio station Rai TV, when its correspondent Enrico Mentana spoke live on the air via a direct telephone call. Parlo da Malta. Qui si stato un massacro. I'm speaking from Malta. Here there's just been a massacre. Shortly before this broadcast, a news bulletin on the Maltese national television had erroneously stated that all passengers had been released and were safe. Decisions taken by the Maltese government drew criticism from overseas. The United States protested to Malta about U.S. personnel sent to resolve the issue having been confined to Air Squadron HQ and the U.S. Embassy in Floriana. The United States had seen the situation as so serious that it had ordered naval ships, including an aircraft carrier, to move toward Malta for contingency purposes. EgyptAir still FLIs the Athens-Cairo route, now assigned flight numbers 748 and 750 and flown by Boeing 737-800. The flight number 648 is now on its Riyadh-Cairo route. In popular culture, the events of the hijacking were related in an account by American survivor Jackie Nink Flug. who had been shot in the head on the Biography Channel television program I Survived, which was broadcast on April 13, 2009. Lawrence Zrinzo, the neurologist and neurosurgeon who established neurosurgery as a subspecialty in the Maltese Islands, performed Flug's neurosurgical procedure. She related details about the flight and the attack in her 2001 book, Miles to Go Before I Sleep. The incident was chronicled and reenacted in an Interpol Investigates episode, Terror in the Skies, broadcast by the National Geographic Channel. The hijacking is recounted in detail by survivors and eyewitnesses in the declassified episode, Terror in the Sky, To Catch a Hijacker. The hijacking is also the subject of the book Valinda, Our Daughter, written by Canadian author Gladys Taylor. The events of the hijacking are described in and used to further the plot of Brad Thor's novel Path of the Assassin. A similar situation appeared in the 1999 movie Mummy by Russian director Denis Yevstigniev. This is a movie based on the hijacking of Aeroflot Flight 3739 in 1988.